We got some practice working with exceptions in the last video, but they were the standard exceptions, the ones that come with the standard library. I want at least a little bit of practice working with custom exception types, so I'm going to try asking for that. I only want to do maybe one exercise. It's going to require, I think, a pretty detailed request. One of the reasons is a custom exception type is maybe a structure type or a class, although we don't know what that is yet. And if I'm not careful in how I ask ChatGPT, it might create some custom type that's sort of above the level that the course is currently at. So I guess I have to be careful with my request. I want more practice working with exceptions in C++ 20. I just learned about exceptions and basic structures containing only data. Can you generate a practice exercise involving exceptions with the following properties? The exercise is the exercise consists of starter code missing the implementations of, let's do, 3 functions as usual. Each missing function is preceded by a header comment with a formal specification. I guess that's a separate bullet point. Okay. And then I want a main function full of tests, especially because I'm going to be working with structure types. The main function is already written and contains tester code, test cases for each of the missing functions. The 3 missing functions involve both throwing and catching exceptions of some custom exception type, where the custom exception type is a basic structure type. It's the best I can do. Don't show me the solution. Okay, that's a tall order. Certainly. Okay, we'll see about that. I'm already getting the feeling that it didn't do what I wanted. So if you stare at this line looks a little bit suspicious. That's not like anything we've ever seen before. Maybe I can ask it to give up on that. Let's see. Do any of these things involve catching exceptions? I don't think they do. Do any of the functions in the code above require catching exceptions? They're expected to throw exceptions. So no. Okay, that's a long explanation. Can you regenerate the exercise such that some of the missing functions require catching exceptions as well as throwing them? Also, so I'm going to try and get it to not do this. This line here is something called a constructor. We're going to learn about that in like 2 weeks, but we're not going to do it today. So I'm going to ask it, please ensure that the custom exception type or types do not involve anything other than plain data. The term plain data is actually used in when discussing the data-only style of struct. So maybe if I say plain specifically, it'll figure out what I mean. I am really sort of torturing it here. I'm asking it for a pretty complicated thing. Okay, we'll see what happens. I guess I forgot to say don't give me the solution, but we'll see. Okay, this looks a lot better though. It still has these constructors, but we can work around that. Okay, so it looks like it might be giving me some solutions. Yeah, okay. Okay, so I'm going to ask it for the same clarification as last time. It's pretty clear this is one topic where it has some knowledge, but it doesn't quite know what I want or something. Like it seems to know what exceptions are, but it's not able to generate what I'm asking for. That looks better. Can you make the following improvements? Ensure that the contents of the missing functions are missing, are blank. Ensure that the missing functions are blank. It seems like it's given me some starter code for the missing functions. I don't want that. I'd rather struggle or complain to it than have some starter code. I also don't like what seems to be happening in main here. So in main, it looks like it's doing the same thing it did last time, where it just has this huge bundle of tests all surrounded by one massive try block. Use a separate try block, well, try catch block in main for each test case. See what it can come up with here. Okay, it's got different, it looks like it's done what I've asked. Now, I'm still going to have to, I'm still a little bit suspicious about some of the things that it's doing, but I think we've got enough to try this out. Okay, and I mean, ultimately, I don't want to make a video that's 40 minutes of me arguing with ChatGPT, so, or I'd rather not. I mean, I will if I have to. Okay, so paste that in, and then we'll try compiling it to see what happens. I'm expecting it's going to give me a whole bunch of warnings about stuff that's missing. It looks like that's what's happening. Okay, let's go up here and see what we can do about this. So it's made these exceptions that are basically analogs of the exceptions in the standard library. So if we think about that exercise from last time, these exceptions could fit perfectly into that exercise. Now, I don't blame it too much because when I design custom exception exercises, I sort of do the same thing. Now, this line here, line 8, is a constructor, which is a certain type of function, although the way it's written, it doesn't make that obvious. It's actually a function. You might write it to look like this. I'm going to delete this completely. I suspect that doing so isn't going to break anything. The way that this is currently written, this is sort of a convenience. It's not actually a necessary convenience at the moment. So I'm just going to delete it and see if it still compiles. So a constructor is only needed when you create the object. And because I'm assuming I'm the one creating and throwing these exceptions, deleting those constructors shouldn't actually impact the correctness of the rest of the code. I think I was right. So we're going to go forward with this exercise. Here are two custom exception types, division by 0 and negative number. And now we're being asked to implement, okay, yeah, there's square root again. We're being asked to implement various functions very similar to yesterday, or the last video, which I recorded yesterday. We want to divide numbers and throw an exception if we divide by 0. We want to compute a square root and then throw an exception if that doesn't work. And then we want to add two strings together and then, handle STD length error. Okay, that's a new one. What does it want me to do with this? So this is not a custom exception type. And to be honest, I'm not immediately thinking of really anything that would involve length error. So I imagine maybe it's saying if you try and add two strings together and they're too large that it's not going to work. I'm going to ask it for clarification on this. I'm about to learn something new. And so I'll write these two. And then the test cases I think are pretty similar to ones in the last video. It looks like they're not as comprehensive. Yeah, so it looks like there's like one test case for each. I think that should be sufficient. Yeah, there's also one invalid test case for each. All right, so in the last video, I demonstrated that I am able to write an implementation of finding square roots from scratch, and that was a very edifying experience. Today, though, I'm going to phone it in a little bit, and I'm going to use the math library. So I mentioned yesterday or I mentioned in the last video that is a valid solution unless it says you can't do that, and so here I am going to do that. All right, divide. So this is very similar. Okay, implement this function and handle division by 0 exception. Okay, that's odd. I think it actually means throw division by 0 exception if necessary. So I'm going to interpret it that way. And I could ask it for a solution. So if when I'm done, I'm concerned about whether I did what it wanted me to, I could ask it to generate me a solution. I could also ask it to give me a more formal header comment here. It didn't do that, even though I did request that. But I've argued with it enough for today. So I'm going to just try and forge ahead anyway. So basically, if b is equal to 0, then I can't do division because that would be division by 0. So I'm going to throw an instance of, it's called division by 0 exception. Okay. So there it is. I'm going to initialize that structure with a message which says, I don't know, can't divide by 0. Notice that this structure contains one member, which is a string called message. Now remember that what I'm doing here on line 19 is just a shortcut for creating a structure object. I could call this object S and initialize it the usual way. So I declare a variable of type division by 0 exception named S, and then I throw that object S. The way I was writing it a minute ago, I guess I'll leave it like this. The way I was writing it a minute ago is just a shortcut to create an instance of an object and then throw it immediately. And then otherwise I just return A over B. All right. Now, square root. Okay, so same deal here. If it's negative, then it says I'm supposed to calculate the square root of a non-negative number. So 0 is allowed, but negative numbers aren't. So I'll just say if x is less than 0, and then proceed as I did last time. So I've got negative. I assume this is where I throw negative number exception. So I'm going to throw a negative number exception. Can't compute square roots of negative values. And this time, because the exercise doesn't say I can't do this, I am just going to call the square root function that lives in the standard library, because I can write it myself, but I did that already. And I mean, I could even go copy and paste my code from the last video, but I don't have it handy. So I'm going to do this, and I'm going to hope for the best. I'm going to try testing this, and then I don't know what I'm going to do about this. I'm going to ask for some clarification. Now that I have seen the other two functions, when it says handle length error, I understand that maybe it means I should be the one throwing length error, not catching it. Handle is not the right word for that, but it sounds like ChatGPT has gotten confused. I'm going to return an empty string from this for now, because if you try and return a string, if you have no return statement in a function that returns a string, that could result in a crash. So I'm going to run this. These are all irrelevant. They're just saying I never use my result. I think it's because in the test cases for these, so in the test case where it tests division by 0, it never uses the result because it expects that the test case is going to fail. So it makes sense the result never gets used. So practice exceptions 2. Okay, so I try dividing 10 by 2, I get 5. I try computing the square root of 16, I get 4. Now, there's this test of the concatenated string that I'm not going to worry about for now. And then I try and divide by 0, and it throws an exception. I try and compute a square root of a negative number, and it throws an exception. Now, I could test this very rigorously, and I should in a general sense. Because I wrote these two functions in the last video, and I tested them more rigorously, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take this as sufficient. I guess I'll do one more test of square roots just to make sure that, let's do the square root of 10, just to make sure it is returning a double value pretty much. Okay, and that looks vaguely correct for the square root of 10. Okay, so I'm going to ask it what the deal is with concatenate strings. I think the fastest way of getting a straight answer out of it would be to say, could you give me a formal specification? Can you generate a header comment for this function containing a formal specification? Okay, so it takes 3 parameters, and now that I understand that when it says handle length error, it probably means that it throws a length error, not that it catches one, even though that's a little bit weird. Again, handle doesn't really mean that to me. I'm going to copy this. I think this has everything I need. So I'm going to copy this and paste it in. Okay, concatenate 2 input strings and handle exceptions. This is weird. I asked ChatGPT to give me some code where I could write catch blocks, and it didn't seem to have done that. So it takes 2 parameters, string 1 and string 2, and they're 2 strings to add together. This is going to be a very classic contrived exercise. And then this third parameter, max length, apparently my goal is if you try and concatenate 2 strings and their combined length is longer than max length, then we've got a problem. Then I throw this exception. This is one of our standard exceptions, but I can't remember ever using this before in my life. I mean, we use domain error and runtime error and whatever, but length error, I guess that makes sense that exists. Maybe I should use that more often. So I guess what I'm being asked to do is basically just this. If the length of the combined string, so string 1.length plus string 2.length, is greater than max length, then we've got a problem, then we throw an exception. And this time we're going to throw std length error. So I throw an instance of this, and I'm just going to say too long, I guess. This is a very odd exercise. So one of the reasons this is weird is that really, because strings are smart objects, because they have built-in functionality and protections and whatever, if you try and add two strings and they're too long, then the plus operator on strings can throw some kind of exception. It shouldn't be, I don't need to be the gatekeeper, but fair enough, it's a contrived exercise. So then I'm going to return str1 plus str2. I'm just going to use the plus operator on strings. So we'll try that out and just see what the test cases do. Okay, so it's giving me a warning about sizes, and this is ChatGPT's fault, actually. So what it's saying is string1.length, that function returns unsigned int. It's a size, and we know already that vectors and strings, when they work with sizes, they're unsigned. Same with string2.length. So this left-hand side of this inequality is an unsigned int. But the right-hand side, the maximum length, is a signed int. It could be negative. And I can't do anything about that. I mean, that's part of the signature I was given, which is really weird. I mean, why would you'd think ChatGPT, which is usually pretty specific, it's very fastidious about details, why would it make this mistake? So I guess the best thing I can do to work around it is jam this max length value into an unsigned int to make the compiler shut up, even though I think really the compiler has a good point. I mean, I should just make this thing unsigned. So we'll try running it. Okay, and it does concatenate, I guess, hello and world. Yeah, there it is. And then I try doing it again later. So I try concatenating these two long strings, and the maximum length I give is 10. And then I throw an exception. And here it's a standard exception. So notice that when I'm throwing division by 0 and negative number, I'm throwing this structure object of my own production, which has this member called message. When I catch it, I can therefore use .message to go grab whatever's in that field. But when I catch length error, I'm catching a standard exception, which has this .what function, which by now you've seen in the lectures, and so I'm just do .what. So okay, I guess I've finished the exercise. I don't know. I'm wondering if so the first thing I'm going to figure out is I noticed it gave me a version where it handed me a solution a while back, and I'm going to look at that. Yeah, so that is apparently what it wanted for concatenate strings. It just wanted me to check the length, which is okay. I mean, it's a contrived exercise. I don't blame it too much for that. Just to clarify, none of the functions that I have to write require me to catch any exceptions, right? I mean, I asked for that, but it doesn't seem like I needed that. Yeah, that's correct. So it didn't do that. Okay, well, whatever. I mean, we argued with it for long enough that I don't think I can get a better exercise out of it for this topic. So there we go. I'm going to declare it completed. We've tried doing some exercises involving throwing some custom exceptions, and we know how to catch them because it generated code to catch them for me, not because I was able to write that myself.